The strangest thing about my life falling apart was that it happened on a day filled with such ordinary, brilliant sunshine. There was no ominous thunder, no torrential rain to set the scene for a tragedy. It was a Tuesday, and I remember the way the light caught the dust motes dancing over the kitchen island, making them look like scattered flecks of gold. I was humming, wiping down the countertop, my phone propped up against the fruit bowl. A text from Mark lit up the screen and a smile, small and secret, touched my lips. Thinking of you, can you talk later? It was a simple message, but it carried the weight of 1,000 illicit promises. My name is Clara, and for 20 years, I was Mrs. Daniel Miller. I said those words with such pride once. Daniel built me a life of quiet comfort. He was a good man, a stable man. He remembered our anniversaries. He fixed the leaky faucet without being asked. And he always made sure my car had a full tank of gas. But somewhere along the way, that stability began to feel like a cage. The comfortable silences became empty voids. We were two satellites orbiting the same planet, never colliding, but never truly connecting either. Our son Liam had left for college a year before, and the house, once filled with his chaotic energy, now echoed with a silence that was deafening. Then came Mark. He was a client at the interior design firm I work for, charming, spontaneous, with a laugh that seemed to unravel something tight inside my chest. He saw me, or at least he saw a version of me I desperately wanted to be, the vibrant, interesting Clara, not just the reliable wife and mother. Our lunches grew longer, our emails more personal. It started with a shared joke, then a confession about life's disappointments. And before I knew it, I was deep in an affair, drowning in the adrenaline of secrecy and the thrill of feeling desired. I told myself it was just to feel alive again. I wasn't going to leave Daniel. How could I? Our lives were too entwined, our history too long. It was a compartmentalized part of my life, a beautiful stolen painting I kept in a hidden room. Daniel, with his head always in architectural blueprints or financial reports, seemed none the wiser. He was quieter, perhaps more absorbed in his work than ever, but I attributed that to stress. I was so wrapped up in my own deception that I failed to see the quiet calculation in his eyes. The first crack appeared a month before the sunny Tuesday. Daniel came home and announced with unusual excitement that he had sold a major project, a multi-million-dollar eco-resort. "It's a huge deal, Clara," he'd said, his eyes gleaming. "It means a lot of travel for a while, site visits, meetings with investors. It's going to be intense, but the bonus alone will set us up for years." Relief washed over me. His absence would provide the perfect cover for my time with Mark. I remember feeling almost giddy, a horrible, selfish emotion that I disguised as wifely support. "That's wonderful, honey. You've worked so hard for this," I'd said, kissing his cheek. He hugged me tightly, a fraction too long, and when he pulled back, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I thought nothing of it. The travel started. Daniel would be gone for 3-4 days at a time. My world became a series of clandestine meetings, a Coley bookstore cafe with Mark, a walk in a park 2 towns over, an occasional nerve-wracking afternoon in a hotel room where I would meticulously erase all evidence before returning home. I became an expert liar. I had a story for every late meeting, every unexpected errand. I felt clever, invincible. One evening, after Daniel had returned from a particularly long trip, we were sitting in the living room. He was on his laptop, and I was scrolling through my phone looking at pictures Mark had sent me from a business trip he had taken. Pictures I had already secretly deleted from my phone. The silence was comfortable, or so I thought. "Clara," Daniel said, his voice calm and even. "I was thinking about our finances with this new project. The cash flow is going to be significant, but irregular. I'd like to move some of our savings into a separate high-yield account just for the project's initial capital. It would be under my name for ease, but of course it's still ours. My heart, so accustomed to deception, gave a little leap. This was perfect. It felt like he was handing me a gift. If our main joint accounts were less flush, my own withdrawals for gifts from Mark for fancy lunches would be less noticeable. That sounds like a very smart idea, Daniel, I said, looking up from my phone with what I hoped was an expression of wifely admiration. You're so good with these things. He smiled, a soft, gentle smile. I just want to take care of us. And I, the fool, believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of deception and passion. Daniel was busy with his project and I was busy with my double life. He started coming home later, sometimes looking exhausted but satisfied. He'd talk about land surveys and environmental impact reports, and I'd nod along, my mind a million miles away, thinking about the scent of Mark's cologne. I noticed Daniel had bought a new watch, a sleek, expensive-looking thing. When I complimented it, he just shrugged. A little reward for myself, the project is going better than expected. The day of the collapse, that brilliantly sunny Tuesday, started like any other. Daniel had left early, giving me a quick peck on the cheek. I remember the feel of his lips, a familiar dry touch. I spent the morning cleaning, a strange domestic normalcy settling over me. Mark had texted asking if I could get away for a few hours in the afternoon. I was just about to text him back to say yes when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door, a slight frown on my face, and opened it. A man in a sharp dark suit stood there, holding a thick legal-sized envelope. "Clara Miller?" he asked. "Yes." "You've been served," he said flatly, thrusting the envelope into my hands before turning and walking briskly back to his car. Served? My mind went blank. Served for what? A lawsuit? For what? My hands trembled as I tore open the envelope. The words on the first page swam before my eyes. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce. Daniel was divorcing me. A cold dread, sharper than any ice, shot through my veins. This had to be a mistake. He didn't know. He couldn't know. We were fine. I stumbled to the kitchen table, my legs weak, and sank into a chair reading the document with a growing, suffocating horror. Then I saw the date filed. It had been filed over 2 months ago. 2 months, the same time he'd started his big project? The same time he'd become so busy? My phone buzzed on the counter. Mark. I ignored it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I scrolled through my contacts with shaking fingers and called Daniel. It went straight to voicemail. I called his office. His assistant, Sarah, answered. "Oh, hello, Clara. I'm afraid Daniel is in a very important meeting all day. He's completely unreachable." "He's divorcing me," I whispered, the words feeling alien on my tongue. There was a pause on the other end. I can't comment on that, Clara. You should speak with your lawyer." My lawyer? I didn't have a lawyer. I called Mark back, my voice a panicked soba as I told him what happened. He was silent for a long moment. "Clara, this is heavy. Look, you need to figure this out. I have to go." The line went dead. He didn't call back. The hours ticked by in a haze of terror and confusion. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a prison. I tried to access our bank accounts online. The password was rejected. I called the bank. After being put on hold for an eternity, a polite but firm representative informed me that, according to the records, I was no longer on the account. The separate account Daniel had mentioned, the one for his project, flashed in my mind. There was no joint account anymore. He had moved everything. As the sun began to set, casting long, accusing shadows across the floor, I heard the key turn in the lock. Daniel walked in. He looked different. The quiet, slightly stooped posture was gone. He stood straight, his shoulders squared. He was wearing one of his good suits, and his face was a mask of calm detachment. "Daniel!" I choked out, leaping from the chair, the divorce papers clutched in my hand. "What is this? What have you done?" He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw it. I saw the cold, hard intelligence that had been there all along, hidden behind a facade of obliviousness. There was no anger in his eyes, no pain, just a chilling, calculated resolve. "Hello, Clara," he said, his voice even and quiet. "I assume you received the papers." He walked past me to the fridge, took out a bottle of water, and unscrewed the cap as if it were any other day. "How long?" I demanded, tears streaming down my face. "How long have you known?" He took a slow sip of water, his eyes never leaving mine. "The day you first had lunch with him at the Oak Room. The day you told me you were working late on the Henderson project." He paused, letting the precision of his knowledge sink in. "I had a client meeting at the restaurant across the street. I saw you through the window. You were laughing. You hadn't laughed like that with me in years." I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. All those months, all those lies. He had known everything. "The project? The resort?" I stammered. "There is no resort, Clara," he said, a faint, cruel smile touching his lips. "It was a convenient fiction. The time I spent away was used to meticulously document your activities, to secure my assets, and file for divorce on grounds of adultery. The new bank account. I moved every single cent of our liquid savings, along with the proceeds from the sale of some stocks I had inherited, into it. It's all perfectly legal. My name was always on those inherited assets. The house," he gestured around us, "is in my name from before we were married. You'll find you have no claim to it." I stared at him, my mind reeling. This wasn't the man I had married. This was a strategist, a patient, brilliant predator who had watched me walk into his trap with a smile on my face. "But why?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "Why didn't you just confront me? Why this elaborate charade?" His smile vanished, replaced by a look of such profound disappointment that it hurt more than any shout. "Confrontation would have given you a choice, Clara. You could have lied, you could have begged, you could have forced us into messy, emotional, cold therapy. You could have tried to salvage a marriage you had already destroyed. This way," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "this way there are no choices left for you to make. I have taken them all away. You made your bed with Mark, now you can lie in it." He picked up the small suitcase he had left by the door. A suitcase I now realize he had packed for himself weeks ago, a prop in his performance. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice small and pathetic. "I've rented an apartment. My things have already been moved. You have until the end of the month to vacate the premises. The formal eviction notice is with the divorce papers." He walked to the door and paused, not looking back. "Oh, and Clara, I took the liberty of informing Mark's wife this afternoon. I thought she had a right to know. I believe he'll be rather preoccupied for the foreseeable future." And with that, he closed the door behind him. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my old life ending. I was standing in the middle of the kitchen, in the house that was no longer my home, with a bank account that held nothing, a lover who had abandoned me, and a husband who had never been the man I thought he was. The gold dust of the afternoon had turned to ash. The revenge was not loud or violent. It was quiet, absolute, and utterly devastating. And it was only the beginning. The silence after the door closed was a physical presence, thick and suffocating. I stood frozen in the kitchen for what felt like an eternity, the divorce papers, a dead weight in my hand. My first coherent thought was not of Daniel or even of Mark, but of the mundane, the hum of the refrigerator, the persistent blink of the oven clock telling me it was 6:17 p.m. My whole world had just been systematically dismantled, and the appliances hadn't gotten the memo. I ran to my laptop, my fingers fumbling over the keys. I tried to log into our joint banking portal again. Access denied. I tried the investment accounts. Invalid credentials. I called the bank. After being put on hold for an eternity, a polite but firm representative informed me that according to the records, I was no longer on the account. The separate account Daniel had mentioned, the one for his project, flashed in my mind. There was no joint account anymore. He had moved everything. The next few days were a blur of frantic, futile activity. I found a lawyer, a harried-looking woman named Linda, who scanned the documents Daniel had filed. Her face grew increasingly grim. "Clara," she said, leaning back in her chair, "this is one of the most airtight cases I've ever seen. The prenuptial agreement you signed is ironclad, favoring him significantly. The house was his premarital asset, the financial moves he made. He documented everything as business expenses for this fictitious project. It's going to be nearly impossible to prove malfeasance. And with the adultery evidence," she trailed off, giving me a look that was part pity, part reproach. "He set me up," I whispered, the truth tasting like bile.
He led me on for months, letting me dig my own grave. Legally, that doesn't matter, Linda said flatly. You committed the acts. He simply discovered them and protected his assets. It's ruthless, but it's not illegal. I left her office with the crushing understanding that I was not just beaten. I had been outmaneuvered on a level I couldn't even comprehend. Daniel hadn't just reacted to my betrayal, he had authored the entire second half of our marriage as a complex narrative designed for my destruction. I had to tell Liam. That was the worst phone call of my life. My son, my beautiful boy, who thought his parents were boringly stable. I tried to soften it to make it sound like a mutual drifting apart, but he was too smart. "Mom, what's really going on?" he asked, his voice tight. "Dad said he had to tell me something important. He said, you found someone else." The way he said it, the hurt and confusion shattered what was left of my heart. Daniel had gotten to him first. He had framed the narrative, painting himself as the wounded party, which he was, but he had done it with such cold, strategic precision that I was now the villain in my own son's story. Liam was polite but distant. The conversation ended with a promise to call soon that felt hollow on both our parts. The eviction notice became real. I had to pack up 20 years of my life. As I boxed up photo albums and knickknacks, each item felt like an accusation. Here was a picture from our honeymoon. Daniel's face open and trusting. Here was a vase Liam made in kindergarten. I was packing up the evidence of my own crime scene. I had no money for a proper moving truck. I ended up selling my jewelry, the nice pieces Daniel had given me for birthdays and anniversaries, to a pawn shop for a fraction of their worth. The money was just enough for a rental truck and a deposit on a tiny, dismal, one-bedroom apartment across town, a place that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The day I moved out, the sun was shining again, mockingly bright. I took one last look around the empty house. Every room held a ghost. The kitchen, where I'd planned family meals. The living room, where we cheered Liam on his soccer games on TV. The bedroom, where I'd whispered lies to my husband while texting my lover. It was all gone. I drove away in the rattling truck, my entire life reduced to what could fit in its cargo hold. I was 45 years old, and I was starting over with nothing but a suitcase of clothes, a few boxes of memories, and a crushing debt of regret. Daniel's revenge was not a single explosive event. It was a quiet, patient process of isolation and impoverishment. And he had executed it flawlessly. I was now living in the bleak, quiet aftermath of a war I hadn't even known I was fighting. The first year of my new life was a study in gray. My apartment was a box of echoes, and the silence was a constant companion. I found a job as a receptionist at a dental office, a humbling step down from my design career. The money was just enough to cover rent and groceries. There were no more fancy lunches, no secret gifts, no adrenaline-fueled text. There was only the stark reality of my choices. The divorce became final in a cold, procedural hearing. Daniel was represented by a sharp, expensive lawyer who said very little. I sat with Linda, who fought valiantly but was playing a game with rules Daniel had written. I received nothing. No alimony, citing the prenup and my marital misconduct. No share of assets. It was a complete financial obliteration. Liam was the deepest cut. He came to visit my sad little apartment once. He tried to be kind, but he couldn't hide his discomfort. He was navigating his own grief, and the image he had of his family was shattered. He spent most of his time with Daniel, who I learned through the sparse details Liam shared was thriving. He had started a genuine, successful consulting firm with the capital he so cleverly secured. The fictitious project had become a real, prosperous venture. My betrayal had been the catalyst for his own renaissance. The true final act of Daniel's revenge revealed itself 2 years later at Liam's graduation. I sat alone on the hard bleachers, a proud but solitary figure. After the ceremony, I found Liam in the crowd. He hugged me tightly, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the old connection. Then I saw them, Daniel and a woman. She was elegant, smiling, her hand resting comfortably on his arm, and next to her, a little girl, no more than 3 years old, holding Daniel's finger. Liam followed my gaze. "Mom, I thought you knew," he said softly. "That's Eleanor and their daughter Chloe." Their daughter. The words didn't just hit me, they dissolved me. While I had been drowning in my gray existence, Daniel had not just moved on. He had built a new family. He had a daughter, a child who would never know the sound of her parents fighting, a child who would grow up in a house filled with the stability I had thrown away. Daniel caught my eye from across the lawn. He didn't smirk. He didn't glare. He simply looked at me. And then he smiled. It was a genuine, peaceful smile. The smile of a man who had everything he had ever wanted. Then he turned, scooped up the little girl, and kissed his wife on the cheek. That was the masterpiece of his revenge. It wasn't the poverty or the loneliness or even the loss of my son's unwavering devotion. It was this. It was showing me in one devastating, sun-drenched image the full, beautiful, happy life he had built from the ashes of the one I destroyed. He hadn't just punished me. He had replaced me. He had shown me that I was not just a villain, but I was also utterly dispensable. My punishment was not a life of misery, but a life of witnessing his pure, unassailable happiness. And in that moment, I knew I would never, ever escape the consequences of what I had done.